Smith. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, then moved to Michigan, then Kansas, and then in high school we settled in Houston. And in Houston, we lived out in Katy back when Katy was a small town. And then I moved up for college at TCU in Fort Worth, and then went to TCOM as well in Fort Worth, and then moved down in 2005 to San Antonio for residency. Did what's called HPSP, which is like I did ROTC, and then the military paid for my med school. And then I went to residency at Brooke Army Medical Center back when it was Brooke Army Medical Center and not separated. Now it's like a huge joint Army, Air Force, Navy program. But I had half of my rotations were at BAMC and half were in the Air Force at Wolford Hall out at the Air Force Base. And so lived there until 2008 when I finished residency, and then moved up to Fort Hood. It was the height of the troop surge at that point, and looking for a job. My wife had a great job in San Antonio, so I didn't really want to move her. And so we decided that I would try to get a job in San Antonio or at the closest base, which ended up being Fort Hood, and so that she could keep her job, because we both assumed that I would deploy straight out of residency. And so I moved up here and didn't deploy immediately, worked here for about 6 months, commuting back and forth on the weekends to see my wife, and then did deploy in 2008, 2009, and then came back and settled into a job at Fort Hood. And then we ended up deploying again in 2011, and then just came back to Fort Hood and stayed at Fort Hood the entirety of my military career, basically, besides those 2 deployments, and then ended up getting out of the Army in 2016 when we started this Premier in Temple here. And so I still work out at Fort Hood as a contractor because I love the military and I love the base and the soldiers and all the residents, because we have a residency program out there. But my primary job now is here at Premier. So enjoy the heck out of that. Yeah, no good reason, that's for sure. I did not know what I wanted to do coming into college and just thought I'll start as pre-med. And I think if I go through this way, then at least I can get a job on the flip side of it all. And if I ended up hating it, I was just going to change majors into something else. And so I was initially, I think, a biology major, ended up hating biology, but sticking with pre-med, and ended up with a criminal justice major, but still didn't have any other better ideas of what to do with my life. So, just continued right on through and got into med school and went through med school. And now I'm very happy with the way my life turned out, but I don't think it was ever a definite plan. Even through med school, there were definitely days that I doubted what I wanted to do with my life and whether I was in the right place. But now I'm very happy that for whatever reason I stuck with it and got through, because I would recommend the field. Some physicians wouldn't recommend it, but I'd recommend it to my kids. I hope they follow my footsteps, and to anybody. I think the key is picking the right field in medicine and being honest with yourself and what you like and don't like. I think most physicians end up having done well in high school and having done well in college, and then they have to do well in med school. And so then they have to decide, what do I want to do? And instead of thinking about what they really like or where their skills are, they just decide, this is the best thing, so I'm going to go be a trauma surgeon, or I'm going to go be what is the elite of the elite. And being honest with myself, I realized I like work, but I also like to play. And in emergency medicine, thankfully, I fell into this field, and it allows me to work hard when I'm at work, but then affords me enough time and energy on the outside of work to enjoy life. We just came through probably the tail end of cedar season, and cedar was really hard to tell from COVID. I will be quite honest, because people end up feeling absolutely miserable. Their nose is exploding. I felt miserable. They're coughing. Sometimes they can even develop a fever with cedar allergy, which is not common with allergies in general. And I would say probably the best way to discriminate cedar allergy or general allergies from COVID is the fever, but cedar fever made that very hard. So really the only way is with a rapid test, ultimately, or a PCR. And so because it can be very hard, especially in young people, they're doing just uniformly amazingly well with COVID. And so if I could tell you, the vast majority of my young people said, I thought it was just allergies. And so it feels almost the same, which is great and bad news. It's great news that people are having such benign courses when they're young. But it's bad news because this thing was so difficult to control because so many people are just walking around day to day thinking that it's allergies when it was actually COVID. And while they're not going to get sick, I tend to think of it as this like ever branching tree. They spread it to somebody and that person's not going to get sick either. But the average person spreads it to 2 or 3 people on average. And eventually that tree keeps splitting to the point that one of the people gets very sick or dies. And so that's why it's been so hard to control in at least one regard, is that in young, healthy people, they're going about their lives. Most of them think it's just allergies.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend the vaccine because otherwise that's just going to unfortunately continue with these really benign courses. They've come out now about a third of cases are completely asymptomatic. And early research was saying the asymptomatic people probably actually shed the virus for far longer. It was symptomatic people. This was like very early in the pandemic. Symptomatic people, they were seeing shed it for 2 weeks, whereas asymptomatic, the average was like 19 days. Now, I do tell people that the vast majority of transmission probably occurs when they're coughing and they're sneezing, if they're not wearing a mask and really aerosolizing it and letting it hang out. It's probably very safe to even have COVID with a mask as long as you're not coughing and sneezing because it's probably well contained. It's probably not even transmitting that 6 feet that we talk about. But when people do cough or sneeze, then it probably aerosolizes and stays in the air for a while. We thought it was just falling out pretty quick, but then data was showing that some of these rooms are contaminated with viral particles floating around for, if not 30 minutes to 60 minutes and longer. So it gets more complicated if people are very minimally symptomatic and sneezing in particular, or coughing or singing where they're just throwing it out there. But if people have the virus and they're wearing a mask and they're not doing those things, then it's probably not very contagious at all. Yeah, I get feeds in my email. I would say subscribe to something called Journal Watch, which is just emergency medicine specific, but then it also feeds all of the big articles. It's put out by the New England Journal of Medicine, and they just condense the abstracts down. And so daily I get a battery of emails about it, and then you can click into it and read if you're more interested. Medscape also has a great blast out every day with just the top studies and articles. A lot of them are interesting to read. Some of them are editorials, but most of them are looking at the studies. I do miss the days of drug reps because I would put a plug in for back when we had drug reps. So they would come by, and granted that was very biased, but they would have all kinds of information on stuff. And these days it's hard to keep up with new drugs and emergency medicine. We see people on these smatterings of, there are so many new drugs now that I do sign into UpToDate and stay signed into UpToDate, which is just a great resource. It would be a little bit thick and difficult to read if you weren't in the medical field, but it's a very great resource for me to just cross-check medications and read about stuff. If you look at my browsing history every day that I work, you'll see that I'm in there 10 or 20 times looking up stuff. And then there's one called Journal Feed that comes out every day, particularly for emergency medicine, and it digests a big article each day. And so most of it is online. I just recertified my 10-year boards, and I was doing a whole bunch of questions, and I still do them every morning. I have a little morning routine that I go through, and I really enjoy doing just 5 questions a day, and it helps me still work with the residents to actually stay up to date because they still have to take their tests and to be able to quiz them. And 5 seems to be a number that I can remember at the end of the day. If I do too many questions or too much, like it all just gets lost in the wash, especially as I get older. It's amazing how hard it is to just gather new information and make it stick. And so I take these smaller bites, and hopefully they stick for longer and longer, and I can regurgitate them on patients or the residents, at least, all of these little bites that I take. This is always such a hard question because the audience is so important to know when you are answering this question, because there are some people that just want to know about like the stuff you've pulled out of people. And there are some people that want to hear about the trauma. And then there are some people that just want to hear about the social interactions that can be super interesting and the fights. And I've been doing it now for almost 15 years of emergency medicine now. And so there's been a lot. And a lot of sadness, and that's the stressful part. But some of the more interesting and crazy days, I was one of 4 physicians on during the first Fort Hood shooting back in November 5th of 2009. And so we were just absolutely inundated with patients in a way that I had just come back from Iraq, and we didn't get, even in Iraq, because it was pretty safe over there at that point with the surge and all. We never got 20 to 30 patients at one time, all penetrating wounds. And in Iraq, we didn't really see people were wearing body armor and helmets. So the penetrating wounds were often, if it was bullets, to the extremities, whereas that day, the penetrating wounds, especially in the people that were really sick, were all to the torso and head. And so that was one of the more interesting days in my career. I actually happened to be at the second Fort Hood shooting, which doesn't get as much publicity. That was in April of 2011. And that was an interesting day as well. Fewer patients, but the same kind of penetrating trauma to the torso. And yeah, those were more interesting. The social interactions in the ER, aside from the trauma, those are what is stressful. Every patient that has a miscarriage, or every patient that comes in embarrassed because they do have something inside of them, those are not as exciting to me anymore. But yeah, those are the things I think people don't think about in the ER, is how, I guess everybody realizes when you come into the ER, most people are under stress, but that's one of the harder things to deal with in emergency medicine, is the stress that they're under and not taking that onto yourself, or learning how to erect some barriers. Maybe it's humor, or to try to stay relatively sane. The medicine isn't as interesting to me anymore. It's really the people that are far more interesting to me. And trying to get to know people. And I pretty much feel like I already know, in terms of the medicine, what we're going to do and how this is going to go within the first few minutes of talking to people. But nowadays, what really gets me excited is just talking to them about their job, or their kids, or their tattoos, or whatever else. And I try to tell the residents, the thing that's going to keep you in medicine, the most interesting thing, not to the world, but to you, is going to be not the medicine of it, because we all get to be pretty good and proficient at it. But it's going to be finding something from every single patient that you find interesting or that you enjoy. And I promise you, it's not going to be, I promise them, it's not going to be the medicine of it, because my wife asks me all the time, hey, did you see anything interesting today? And I say, I don't know, nothing's really interesting to me anymore. There's nothing really that, medically speaking, that gets me going anymore. But what gets me going is getting to know the people and getting to talk to them about their lives in sometimes a difficult circumstance.
Of course. Do you get nervous anymore?
Yeah, I definitely get nervous. And again, in the same regard, it's not the medicine that makes me nervous anymore. It's the social interactions and the breaking of bad news to people. And the breaking of no news is probably the thing that I hate most in emergency medicine. Because probably in 80-90% of patients, I walk in and I don't have an answer for why they have the symptoms that they have. And I just have begun to fear and hate that kind of blank look on, then what's wrong with me, doctor? And so that always caused me a little angst, especially if patients are very nervous about what's going on. That always makes me a little nervous. And I tell people, I'm just trying to judge your level of concern. If this chest pain that you're having now is something you've experienced before, and you're not worried about it because you made it through, you really just need some medicine to help your pain and a day off work, then that's great. I'm not concerned. But if this chest pain to you is markedly different and you feel like you're going to die, then I'm very concerned. And even if everything's negative, then we need to find a place for you or keep you here until we both feel better about you. And so I think that's one of the harder parts of the job, is we can have 2 chest painters in 2 different rooms right beside each other. And one patient, it's completely nothing and all the labs come back normal, and they're absolutely not concerned about it because this has happened before. And the next patient right beside them, all the labs come back normal, and yet they have this feeling of impending doom. And I've learned to pay attention to this feeling of impending doom and take it seriously. I was keeping a toll of how many people said, I think I'm going to die, and then actually died. And I really stopped at 3 or 4. But it got to 3 or 4 patients early in medicine that ended up saying, I think I'm going to die. And then they abruptly died. And so I take that very seriously now, those angst that the patients feel. And if I'm getting this little bit of anxiety both from them, but trying to feel like, oh, what are you feeling? So to some extent, you can't really insulate yourself that much from it. If I'm getting nervous, if the hair on my back is standing up, then I need to do something about that. But yeah, I don't think you ever divorce yourself from the nerves, or I hope I don't. I think cancer is the hardest one that I wish it would go away, especially childhood cancer. There's just nothing more tragic and arbitrary nature of where and how it hits. I think even though driving is more dangerous than flying per se, we all think it's safer because we have some element of control over what we're doing. And I think in many disease processes, there's an element of control that we feel like, oh, even though we probably can't entirely, if we do these certain things, like maybe we can avoid these things. Cancer is one that there are carcinogens out there, but man, I think that a lot of it is genetic and it just happens, and it's just so arbitrary. And man, the kids with cancer, that's the hardest thing. And in emergency medicine, it's actually probably the biggest risk. We're CTing people all the time, which I'm not worried about the radiation of the CT. But what happens is we do see a lot of little nodules here and there that most of the time we don't know what to do with, but any of them could develop into a bigger nodule and it could be cancer. And that's always a hard conversation to try to explain to people, hey, you don't need to change your life because we found this small nodule in your lung, and I don't want you to lose any sleep over this at all. I just want you to know it's there, and I want you to follow up for an x-ray in 6 months and trying to convey to people like an appropriate level of concern so that they're not like telling their family they're dying and living like in terror for the next 6 months, but also a level of concern that drives them back to a healthcare professional in order to get an x-ray. And that's always a hard balance, because if you tell people it's nothing, or you don't tell them about all of these incidental we find on the CAT scan, then it could be something. And we could have caught it in an early stage. Whereas if you tell them, hey, this is really scary, then like you're probably ruining the next 6 months of their life unnecessarily, because we see these every single day.
I'm going to finish with this one. Dr. Smith, you are one of the most positive people I've ever met. So what's your advice for people to have a positive attitude?
Oh, man, that's a hard question. Yeah, I think that it's like a paradoxical pessimism. When you expect everything to be terrible, then you're just pleasantly surprised with anything that's good. And I think that, unfortunately, some of the most optimistic people have like this expectation of, and for me, I just have an expectation that things are just going to be a mess. And so anything that is light or good is really refreshing, and you cling to it and you find them all day long. I think the other thing is just getting through the things I want to get through in my morning, and it grounds me for the rest of the day. And so that if things all do go to pot, then I'm okay. I think I am a Christian, and that definitely gives me an eternal hope. And my prayer recently has been, just let me receive the day instead of let me seize the day. One of our local pastors said that, and I think that's been super helpful as well, because I think I'm from a generation that we could all be astronauts if you just work hard enough and like just seize the day, carpe diem. But like that just gives us a lot of stress and pressure, and it ends up in a lot of disappointment and pain often. And if I am just here to just love people and enjoy them and just receive the day and try to make it through in a godly, loving way, then it changes my whole perspective of the rest of the day, as opposed to, did I do the absolute best thing constantly, like that will further myself and further everybody else? Like, that will drive you crazy. I probably mischaracterized what has now become a gun and run with what used to be zombie runs back in the early days of zombie runs. There was this event that I started doing probably 10 years ago, and it was in like small town Texas, and it was called the Zombie Run. And you dress up in, some wear costumes, but you basically carry all of your guns and ammo on your person, and it's a 6 sometimes 3 to 6 mile obstacle course Spartan run with shooting stations along the way. So it's like a 3-gun match, but you're running with a pistol and a rifle basically, and it's run for time. And in the early days, that was the only one I was aware of. So for a long time, I've referred to it as a zombie run because all of the targets are steel targets and they're dressed up with, this was back in the day when zombies were big. The Walking Dead had just come out. And so they look like zombies. And so you're running around shooting. The sport has become more of a controlled sport now. And in fact, like lately, A&M even has a team with their core that does these gun and runs, and it's a ton of fun. The one that I've been doing recently is called the WTF, the Waco Tactical Fitness Biathlon. And it's out in Crawford, and you dress up and you actually run like it's almost downtown Crawford that you're running through in like full garb and running with your gun and everything. It's amazing. Only in Texas that they could do that. Yeah. And so I've been doing these now, and they've branched out. There was one recently in Arkansas, and it's just a fun way to give me an excuse to stay in shape and do more of the interval training. And then I've always enjoyed guns, used to like hunting. I'm not as into killing anything anymore. And so I still like to shoot though. And so it's just a real fun way to keep shooting and keep exercising and give me an excuse to stay in shape as I get older. It's a ton of fun. Yeah. Yeah, it's been a couple weeks. COVID has been hard, but good. I think a lot of people, myself included, have gotten into working out at the house more, which makes it easier and harder in ways. It's easier because like you just have to go into your room that you have your equipment in and just start and get a little exercise in. So it's easy to get a little 15-30 minute workout in. And it's great because I think my kids are now 11 and 9. And so they can see me in there and they're in there with me oftentimes exercising. So I think it's a really positive thing from a family dynamic. Sometimes it's a little harder because you don't have this carved out sometimes portion of time that you're going to go to the gym and come back. But for efficiency's sake, and if you can get the equipment you want, doing a home gym, I think is the way of the future. And that's kind of what I've been doing now for at least through COVID, but I started doing it before COVID, and it makes it harder to miss a workout. So yeah. I do enjoy it though. We talk about like de-stressing and taking the burdens of the job and getting rid of them. That is one of the most healthy things I've found to help me just to relax, start my day off. I usually exercise in the mornings and listen to a podcast and exercise, and it used to make me anxious because I had to go to the gym after work. And this way I'm like, if the whole day goes terrible, at least like the first hour and a half of my day was productive and I listened to something and I exercised. So yeah, I try not to miss. Definitely Dr. Stroman. I love that guy. Man, that guy, he is so big and strong, but he's the gentlest giant ever. He's the nicest guy in the world. I feel like that's true gentleness, when you could crush somebody, but you're easygoing. There are a lot of like meek, gentle people that are just, you could crush them, but like when somebody can truly crush you, like Stroman, and they're just the biggest teddy bear, that's truly, yeah, gentle. So.